Hi, I want to welcome everybody here for the work session, and I just wanted to say a couple words. The strategic plan, I think, is one of the most important thing that's been developed for Carroll County Public Schools. It started, I think, when Mrs. Herbert and Ms. Civility got in, and it's been implemented, approved, and it's like a living document. It changes. And the only thing I wanted to mention, like a lot of things with some of the goals, we've had great plans, and COVID hit and probably set some things back. We'll see more detail tonight, but I just feel like this document's special, and it's something that we try to live by, and that's great. Mrs. McGabe?
Thank you, Mr. Kyler. As you said, the document was written in August of 2018. It was a 5-year plan, and so we're in the last year of that plan right now. It's been a great guidance document for us that we've been able to take a look at each year and see where we are. As Mr. Kyler said, the pandemic took us off some of our goals, set us back a little bit, but it's also still good to see where we are in relationship to where we thought we would be. It will also be very good to see the state data when it comes out in December or January, to see how Carroll County Public Schools has done in relationship to the 23 other school districts in Maryland. Since we were all put through the same pandemic, it will be good to see how our students are doing in relationship to others around the state. So we will continue to wait for that and be eager for that data to come in. And with that, I will turn I'll turn this over to Mr. Shockney, our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction.
All right. Good afternoon, board members. We're going to take a look at our strategic plan. As Ms. McCabe said, we are in year 5 of the plan. I'm going to cover pillars 1 and 2, and then turn things over to Mr. O'Neill, who'll do 3 and 4, and then I'll circle back for a little bit of discipline associated with 4. In your folders, just so you, go ahead.
Excuse me, I do want to say something before we get into all this. I know that in the prior to July 1st, that I asked many times about numbers, presentations, and not being accurate. And I know I've had some other board members also do this. So I don't want you to take the blame for this, because this is not your deal. And also, I do know it got to the point where Mr. Kyler, and I'm not speaking out of turn, told him to go back and redo the whole thing, and it still was incorrect. So I'm telling you, I don't want people to blame you for inaccurate data or misconstrued data. And then when we get the new board members on, then we can do another whole new strategic plan. But I just wanted to make sure that you're not taking the hit for this, Mr. Shockney, because this is just new for you. And I just wanted to set the record straight, because we had trouble with numbers prior to that the last 2 years.
Okay. So just some objectives that we're going to work through. We're going to review the current version of the strategic plan, take a look at each one of the pillars, and provide updated data in each one of the primary focus areas. And then at the end, we'll have a discussion. No doubt, throughout this report, I can summarize and say that that COVID has had a significant impact on our students and our students' achievement, which we are all very well aware of and are working strategically to address. We also know that this is year 5 of the plan, and that after that we'll be developing a new strategic plan. And a big factor in this, and Mr. O'Neill can jump in, is our Blueprint Comprehensive Implementation Plan on the horizon, which will have a lasting impact on us and what we're doing strategically moving forward. So like we've talked about already, this is a 5-year plan. It was initially developed in August of 2018. Our baseline data is from the 17-18 school year in most instances, and we're currently in year 5 of the plan. And as Ms. Herbert said, there were some complexities in preparing our report in this. But again, moving forward, we're going to have a nice, clear, strategic approach to how we're collecting and capturing and presenting our data, so there won't be any questions about that moving forward. Strategic plan has 4 pillars identified there, which you are all very familiar with. I won't go over each one of them, but we're going to break those down and take a look at each one. All right, and I'm working from in your folders. I'm not sure what would be easier. There is this PowerPoint presentation, but there's also a packet of each of the kind of the pillar slides and the data that goes with it. It's a little bit larger. It might be a little bit easier to follow. This document, this part of the document might look a little bit different in its formatting. However, the content is unchanged. I just tried to simplify things a little bit for the presentation. There was a lot of data in different places. I just tried to simplify that here on one chart, and then that secondary chart that's in your packet has the greater detailed data charts as well. So under Pillar 1, and I also forgot to mention, we have several staff members in the audience this evening, so if there's anything that I can't answer as we go, we'll definitely have staff available on hand to be able to follow up. All right, so there were 3 different objectives under Pillar 1, and that student's going to exit college, career, and community ready. That's Objective 1. Objective 2 is that CCPS improves the proficiency level of each student subgroup in ELA and mathematics. Then Objective 3 was CCPS provides access to a well-rounded, varied, and rigorous curriculum to all students. That was then broken down into 4 different priority areas for those different objectives. And the first one focused on our elementary school students and the percentage of students who are reading on grade level as measured by local and third-party assessments by the end of grade 3. So if you take a look, there's the baseline from 17-18. There's the performance level for each of the first 4 years of the strategic plan. And what's new that you have not seen before is the performance from the 21-22 school year there. So if you look at that towards the right of the performance section, the first indicator is our students and their performance on the Comprehension Benchmark Assessment, or the CBA. And that's a very good assessment that measures our students' comprehension. And you can see the target for 21-22 was 70%, but our achievement for last year was 47.18%. That was the area that was most impacted in our student achievement data as it relates to this area and this indicator. And then the percent of students scoring within grade level Lexile on the reading inventory remains consistent from the 2021 school year to the 21-22 school year at about 68.5%, but less than meeting our target. But again, I think this speaks clearly to the impact that COVID and the school closures and our transition from in-person to virtual and back to in-person, or excuse me, vice versa. But again, this just speaks, and again, our teachers are working very hard to make sure that their work is aligned to this. And the other big piece is this is the driving document that all of our schools use as part of their school improvement process, as well as all of our departments here at Central Office. What we do aligns to this plan, so these will continue to be focal points for us moving forward.
And excuse me, Mr. Shockney, again, the 21-22 targets are certainly, or the performance was certainly lower than the target that was indicated, and certainly lower than the baseline from 17-18, which is worth pointing out as well.
Yeah. And these are our third grade students, and keep in mind too, that is, obviously the goal of have our students exiting and reading by age 9 is important. But those students also missed key years, due to the pandemic, of that literacy development piece. And as hard as we worked during, that time, and as aggressive as we were about getting our schools open, getting our kids in, we know that still had a significant impact. And I think that's the central theme that we'll see throughout, which is what we anticipated and knew.
And Mr. Shockney, just kind of going back to our original thinking when we set the strategic plan, it was, we wanted one measure. We wanted to look overall at student achievement, but we wanted one specific measure that we thought was very indicative at the elementary level, one at the middle school, and one at the high school level. And so we chose basically reading levels at the end of third grade, because we know that that's so important to the foundation for children to learn going forward, having that baseline in third grade. And so, as Dr. Joyce pointed out, like in 21-22, so those were third graders for the 21-22 year. So that cohort of kids would have been in first grade
Correct.
at the end of the year when the shutdowns happened.
Correct.
So those are the kids that were impacted very heavily, right? So that shows how much of a struggle it was in, the end of first grade and into second grade. And third grade with all of the craziness with the pandemic. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Carroll County had fared better than other areas in the state, just because of how proactive we were about trying to get kids back in and trying to get them re-engaged as quickly as possible. But that's still a very sobering number. That, we were trying to get that number up to 80%, right? And we were on a pretty good trajectory for that, but then the pandemic hit and shot it, right? So, and that's somewhere that we're gonna, I think, as we progress through this year, it probably makes sense to start rethinking the strategic plan just from it's a 5-year perspective. We want to re-baseline everything and make sure that we're constantly striving for continuous improvement. And as Mr. Kyler said, we want this to be a living document, right? But I don't think that this statistic is going to go anywhere, right? And this is going to continue to be a focus for us, and we're really going to have to shine a spotlight on figuring out how to help those kids that were in those crucial formative years in
Correct.
Kindergarten, first, second grade, right, when the pandemic was really impacting them.
And these two are two of many metrics that our schools are monitoring and using to help drive their instruction, their first pass instruction, interventions. Obviously we've worked very hard with our ELO programs and our students participating in those, but that's in addition to all the extra supports and things that happen during the school day, in addition to thoughtful first past instruction with our students. So obviously this will continue to be a significant focal point for us. But again, I think it points out the impact of the pandemic on our students and achievement.
Yeah, and I know the state has been holding back on releasing those numbers for math and ELA, right, for this year. So we're definitely, so these are our CBA results. Like we're not really going to have much to look at from a state perspective, and it's going to be too late in the game when we actually see it. And we need to be acting now. So I think that looking at our CBA results, I think this is very helpful to at least have our own sort of trajectory of local data.
Yep.
But is it possible to start breaking down into those numbers to understand?
Oh, we have.
Okay.
Yes. So Stephanie Dale, our supervisor of ELA for the elementary school, has been able to break down what our strengths and weaknesses are as a system on the CBA and the RI, and individual schools are able to break down by grade level and by teacher what the areas of strength and weakness are, and that's how they go about setting goals and writing their school improvement plans.
Okay. I mean, is this 47.1? Do we know what the range is for the elementary schools? So we've got 22 elementary schools.
We do.
Right? I'm assuming we've probably got a fairly broad range of where that statistic comes in by school.
Right. I don't have the range with me right now, but we can get that. Do you have the range? I do. Okay.
I mean, I can give you just looking at the spreadsheet from last year.
Yeah. Could you come up to the microphone right here? This is one of our reading specialists. Is it Christy?
Yeah, Christy
Bixler.
Bixler.
Yes.
I'm at William Winchester.
Yes.
It looks like and some other things that happened in between 2017 and last year are the CBA is sort of a different iteration than it was back in 2017. We've split it into two parts we've always had the literary section and then the opinion section, but they were taken closer together. Now we've split them into two parts to make them more formative, based on teacher feedback, so that they can then, like Ms. McCabe said, to plan their instruction because we can really break it down and see where students need help. So we also in that time we transitioned to Performance Matters, which had the rubrics that Performance Matters can use are different than the rubrics we were able to use before. So prior to that, students were able to get extra points on their rubrics, and Performance Matters doesn't allow for that. And so we now have a 10-point rubric, which is better for grading purposes, but also kind of skews the data a bit, just because prior to that, students were able to score extra points. So I'm just looking last year for the literary section for third grade. There's a range meeting 80% going all the way from 28% of students up to 76% of students meeting that 80% mark. For the opinion section, the range goes all the way from 25% up to 69% meeting that 80% mark.
Okay.
And we also have it from the 70% mark, and obviously there's a large percentage of students that met 70% that didn't meet the 80% mark.
And Ms. Bixler just gave a great example of just a small snapshot of the work that our specialists do with our teachers by the team level, at the individual level, truly breaking down the data so they're identifying what's working well, as well as, you know, areas or trends to focus on. If there's something that one school is doing well, through their collaborative efforts as a team, they're sharing that information and looking at the data countywide as well as individually also.
And the reason we set our standard at 80% is that we found over the years through time that if our students can meet 80% on our local assessments, they are very likely, the probability is very high that they will be able to pass the state assessments.
Yeah, the CBA is a rigorous assessment. It's directly aligned with our state assessments, and that's been some great work by Ms. Dale and her team over time to continue to refine that assessment. But again, student does well in the CBA, they're going to do well on the state assessment.
Well, clearly there's a wide disparity, right, between the schools. If we've got a range of 28 to 80%, it sounded like on the reading portion, and 25 to 60, I think you had said on the opinion piece.
I think 69 was the highest.
69, okay.
And then even within the schools,
Oh,
you
yeah.
would find a
Right.
range as well.
Right.
So,
Yes, and I can assure you, within the schools, we have everything from 5% to 100%. So,
So clearly we want to make sure that the schools are building those into their SIP plans.
Most definitely.
In terms of, you know, where they're struggling the most.
Yep.
So that it aligns with
Yep.
school-wide. But there's always been some confusion, I think, on when we say 80% of the CBA, and then we want 80% of the students achieving an 80%.
Yeah.
There's always been a little bit of confusion there, but I think that the 80%, like you were saying, the 80% on the CBA is meant to be a proxy for their on-grade level, right? And would be able to pass the state assessments.
Correct.
So
Yes.
we want the percentage of students at that level to be 80%.
Correct.
Okay.
and then that's always a topic that a lot of school improvement teams sort of, you know, tug back and forth with as well. Because again, even 80%, you know, that's certainly great, but what 20% don't you want to make it? So, you know, it gets into all those kinds of philosophical kinds of discussions. But I can see the 80% and, you know, the value of it at this point. And we'll have to keep that in mind as we look at some of the other targets as we go throughout.
And another thing that our reading specialists do along with our administrators is take a look at where are the deficits or weaknesses and what instructional strategies are going to be used in the classrooms daily or weekly to pull those levels up. And so that's what you'll see in the school improvement plans for different grade levels based on where their percentages are. And whether it's literary or opinion or what piece of that is the issue.
And I'd really like to kind of target certain things in terms of where we know our biggest weaknesses are and kind of marry that up with some of the budget discussions, right? Like when we go to the commissioners and say, you know, we need this budget for next year, I'd like to be able to say, we need to target some specialized instruction at the second and third grade level because this is such a critical part of the foundation for our kids, right? So if we can basically say, look, and that manifests itself in terms of we need, 3 more reading specialists, and specifically at these 3 schools because of, their performance levels, or if there's something very specific and targeted like that we can say, look, this is a need that we have, and take that to the commissioners and say, okay, this is a specific program that we're recommending, and these are the funds that need to come with it in order for us to achieve it. I would really like to be able to get to that sort of granular level of recommendation for the budget.
And sometimes it's just a matter of giving the teachers the extra time to pull together as teams and review the data and look at what it's actually telling them as they're beginning to look at the kinds of instructional decisions they need to make. So again, that's just another way that extra funds can be utilized, just to give those teams PD time to actually go over the data and see what it's telling them and make decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey, because a lot of times people think that the professional development time is just time for a presentation or something like that, but oftentimes professional development time is collaborative planning time for teachers so that they can look at data from common assessments and then make instructional decisions together.
And it's really powerful to watch the teams go through the data. So again, just as we're having the discussion, I'm reflecting. So it's been quite powerful over the years to work with teams as we've looked at data and analyzed it, and just really taking it to the level to say, okay, what is it telling us, and what do we need to do next to help our students achieve?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bixler. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tank.
Well, I was just going to ask, obviously we know what schools probably have more need than another school. Are we making sure, asking the administration if they're reaching out to their PTA or PTOs to potentially hold a family reading night, or, sponsor those type of events to, kind of hopefully bring the scores up a little bit more?
Yeah, whenever the scores are low, not only do we look at what we're going to do for first pass instruction and what we're going to change there, but also intervention, and then how are we going to get the families involved. And so all of that goes into that holistic school improvement plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to middle schools. At the middle school level, the priority focus area was the percentage of students who successfully complete Algebra 1 by the end of grade 8, including successful score on PARC or MCAP. And if you look and see, our performance was 33.4% for 21-22, but with a little bit of an asterisk because that does not include we don't have MCAP data for that year. But we had 33.4% of our students enrolled in Algebra 1 by the end of grade 8, which is significant. And that's been a priority for in this plan each year, and you can see over the course of the 4 years, there's been some pretty good growth there.
And Mr. Shockney, just as some background for that, I think one of the reasons why we had targeted that in 17 and 18, we had the 18.8%, but I think we actually had 100% or close to 100% of our kids enrolled in Algebra 1 that passed the PARC. So we were saying, maybe there's much more room for opportunity here.
Sure.
Like if everybody's passing it, then there's probably some kids that are getting overlooked that should be in Algebra 1 in 8th grade, which is why we had specifically targeted that for middle school. So this is fantastic to see that it's up substantially. But do we know if the kids are still doing as well? Like you said, we don't have the MCAP or PARC results, but is it still the same percentage of kids passing the class for Algebra 1 or something?
Milky, you want to come on up? Come on up.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Jared Milky. I'm the new supervisor for secondary math. So,
Great to meet you.
yeah. We don't have the number currently for those who have passed for last year. We expect a similar outcome, though, with the growth and students performing well. For the same reasons that you said, there are some students who were overlooked, and with the removal of the advanced academics level, we hope that there's going to be more students who can benefit from this access to Algebra 1.
And we've sort of, we had to backwards map that, right? I mean, you can't just suddenly throw a whole lot more kids into Algebra 1 in 8th grade, right? You have to prepare them and.
Correct. So it really starts in 6th grade
Right.
with the 6th grade placement and then moving forward. So you're right, it's a scaffold to get them to be successful in Algebra 1. But I can get the data for you on passing.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
All right. At the high school level, we focus on participation of underrepresented student groups in high school career and technology education, or CTE, honors courses, and advanced placement AP or transcripted credit courses. And for that one, you might want to flip to kind of the second page. And the one thing that I'll point out, I believe it was, I guess the board presentation on the strategic plan last year, where we changed our target. In the previous first 3 years of the plan, we were looking at a 1% range for CTE, a 3% range for honors, and a 3% range for AP transcripted, or 6%, excuse me, for AP transcripted, which we revised the targets, I believe, a year ago to reflect a 3% range for each. So you can see in each student group where we were able to meet and where we did not meet the targeted range.
And just for reference, I never loved the way we were looking at this statistic because
Agreed.
it kind of makes it look like you're trying to pull, kids out from the white category and saying, no, we don't want them going into these things. But that's not really what we meant. We really wanted all groups to grow. We just
Correct.
wanted the underrepresented groups to grow at a faster rate, right?
I think you said that very well, and I think that's definitely something to keep in mind as we move forward for the next plan. To obviously, we're looking at a growth of all students, but an emphasis on the underrepresented groups of students. But we want, obviously, to increase participation for all of our students in these areas. So there are some areas where we've made some good growth, and then some areas where we've been consistent to previous performance.
Can you help me with interpreting this a little bit more? Like I'm looking across at the for the top line, the white, and I can even just start with the first column where it says not met. So the target was 87.9 to 89.9.
Correct.
And what are we actually looking at to say that they didn't?
So with the thinking was, I believe, so we looked at the enrollment, and then obviously part means participation. That means students, how many students actually participated, and the target was within 1% of enrollment. So for that first line, enrollment was 88.9%. So the target was 87.9 to 89.9%. But again, that's where, as you work across, we obviously want to see an increase in participation from all students. But like Mrs. Savigny said, that's we don't necessarily want to see a decrease in any student group. We want to see an increase in all of our student groups.
Mr. Shockney, I know in high school with these AP classes, I know they're very important. Do we have a rundown per high school of the classes who and like the number of students that actually take AP chemistry, AP whatever, and then if they took the test, if they passed the test, and if they use those credits? Because I don't understand, and I know this happened in high school. They would do the AP class, but not take the test. I don't understand that concept unless it was money, but I know at North Carroll, Kim Dolch ran around and she got all kind of money from people and made sure anyone that wanted to take the test. But I want to see what the results are of, how many we have and what are we doing and how are we helping them out. I know I had a student ride with me and she graduated from Gerstel and she went in as a junior in college because of all her AP tests and her credits. So I just want to see how we're faring out with that group.
Great point. And I don't have that off the top of my head, but I know we have that. The only part of that, Ms.
Somebody's
Herbert,
shaking head behind you.
Good, yes,
And
yeah.
I know I've already talked to Sharon this week. No, yeah, this week already, I think. Yes, no, last week, whenever it was. But I would just like to see,
Sure.
you know.
Right.
We'll pull that and get it for you. The one question that I have is, will we be able to tell if they've used the credit or not?
We can't.
We may not be able
Okay,
to
you
tell
can't
that,
track-
but all the other
but-
points we can let you know.
I do know at Manval, there's a student who did community college concurrently with Manval, and she's a junior at Maryland this year.
I would
So
like to see them
it's
take
happening.
advantage of this. College is a lot of money, and
There
just-
are tremendous opportunities. I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Neal here in a minute because there's tremendous opportunities for AP courses as well as transcripted courses through Carroll Community as well too. Both have tremendous opportunities, but a big part of Blueprint in the future. Yeah.
Well, I just hope that our students use this opportunity.
Yeah, Mr. Shockney's mentioned the blueprint a couple of times, and I'm stepping a little bit outside of my area of expertise, except to say that what the blueprint refers to as post-college and career-ready pathways is a major change in secondary education for us and all of the other school systems. So the theory would be once the blueprint's fully operational, students would be identified in 9th grade as to whether or not they've met college and career-ready standard, and if they have, then local school systems have to provide one of 4, and if Mr. King is here and is more tuned in and wants to help me, he may, one of 4 post-college and career-ready pathways, and those include International Baccalaureate, the Cambridge AICE program, a program like a collection or a planned program of AP coursework, not just sort of, I guess the thought is to move away from, to whatever extent it's existed, of a more self-selected random menu of AP courses and more like defining a program of AP courses for a student, and or dual enrollment, a dual enrollment program to culminate in 60 credits or an associate's degree by the time you graduate from high school. So that doesn't necessarily have to re-inform our strategic plan, although it may well do that. But I have a feeling that that's an example of something that'll be a large focus of the comprehensive implementation blueprint plan coming from the state.
And one other thing I do have a question about. This is stuck in my mind for a long time. And I think I'm correct, Ms. McCabe, that in 2019, we only had 50% of our ESOL students graduate. Is that correct? What was that statistic? And I just knew and then, COVID hit, and the numbers changed.
I can't remember if it was the graduation rate or one of the other indicators that we
But
look
I
at,
just-
but it was at about 50%.
Yeah, and I just know now we really need to focus on that also to help them to improve that number. I really do want those children to do well.
And Mr. Neal, your comments, I kind of had 2 questions. I'll ask them both because I think we need to think about them as we go on. One is, how is Blueprint going to affect our strategic plan? And it's got to in some ways. But then I wasn't here, like 2 of you, when this got developed. When I look at a MET or a not MET, either one, we also need to evaluate whether the goals were good goals or not. In some cases, we might have done okay, but the goal was too aggressive or not aggressive enough.
Right.
And I think we need to evaluate that as we go through this.
And Kenny, I agree with you. I think, I'd started off my comments saying I've never loved the way that we've looked at this. And I think maybe a better way to look at it might be, what is the percentage of, by each one of these categories, what is the percentage of the students that fall in that category that are taking CTE or that are taking honors or are taking AP and transcripted? And we want those percentages to be increasing for every group, rather than saying, we don't necessarily want the makeup of that group to change. We want all of the groups to be growing. So if we just looked at the percentage of whites that are taking each one of these and the percentage of Black African Americans that are taking each one of these, and for all the categories, and just we want those percentages to be growing in all the categories. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect
I
sense.
think that really gets much closer to what we're trying to achieve.
Agreed.
And again, that speaks to providing the access to all of the groups. So again, that figure would really be helpful, and as you're saying, we would want to see an increase over the years with that.
That speaks
Right.
volumes, because we really did hash this out
Well,
for
yeah.
a long time. But I think, I agree, Donald, on that. You're spot on that.
And Ms. Pataglias wants to chime in.
Do we, so, you're funny. So I wanted to make sure also that are our counselors and teachers making sure we're identifying students that would benefit going into honors, going into AP
definitely.
classes? Because I can tell you as a mom, like, my one daughter constantly, A's every year. But she was never, like, there was no suggestion, like, maybe you could take this AP class, maybe you should take this. Like, there was never any suggestion for her. So I wonder how many other students out there are not getting those suggestions to potentially challenge themselves.
I would hope that all of our counselors, as they're working with kids on planning coursework, that we're encouraging that student to move to that next level or beyond even. And I think that is a big part of what our counselors do at the secondary level, as well as in our middle schools as well when they're looking at picking their courses. That is a big piece. But I know they spend a lot of time, effort, and energy into doing that, and then really encouraging that kid to move forward and challenge themselves and take that next step, especially if they're on the fence.
And then another question I had is, because I know I've heard a lot of it this year too, is a lot of the students that were coming back to public from private schools, they're very bored right now because they were so far ahead already. So now that the class that they're in, they're basically like, I know this, I'm bored, they're breezing through it. So are we making sure we're identifying those students and getting them moved?
Yeah, if that's the case, and I don't want to, Mr. King can correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, let's get a time with that student's counselor right away to see if a schedule change can happen. Obviously, once the semester's underway, that becomes a little bit of a challenge.
Right.
But yeah, I think if a student is not being challenged academically in a course, to set up that time and to have that discussion right away.
And those placements will be based on the transcript that they bring with them from the private school. I mean, if they've completed Algebra 1, they have to go to geometry, so on and so forth. So, but certainly if there's a level change that would be a benefit to the student, or if there is a more challenging level of the course that they need to take to graduate, I know our counselors are happy to make that change.
And I know a lot of the problems we have is because also staffing too. Like we have only so many that do AP classes, and we only have so many that are able to teach those. So I know that is one of our challenges. So are we also looking at the potential of virtual classes for those as well? So again, like if Man Valley doesn't offer something but Century does, are we trying to
Yeah,
tap
and
that in?
honestly, in a lot of the AP classes, the problem is that we don't have enough enrollment to run them, more than they're overcrowded. I mean, that's rarely the problem. Some of the specialty courses like an AP Chem or an AP Physics may only run every other year at certain schools because they're lucky and happy to get 15 or 16 to enroll. In my experience as a principal, and I dealt with one this summer, begging the parent, give your child a shot at this AP. Absolutely not.
Okay.
So sometimes it's the other dynamic of we're trying to pull them up to a higher level, and there's just either a lack of confidence or desire.
Are they being explained, like if the student potentially takes that could count as like a college cut or
Absolutely.
anything?
Yeah, I believe that they know all the benefits of the AP and dual enrollment, but you have to be a motivated student for all the things we're discussing, and some are highly motivated and some are not, and it's a lot of convincing in counselors' offices, and that's what I was in many of those conversations over the years, and trying to convince the child you can do this, but the ultimate between level 6, level 8, and an AP course, the ultimate decision falls to the student and the parent.
Okay.
And one of the things that's always worried me, and you guys know it better than I do, kids mature at such a different level. Some of them really aren't ready. That scares me about some of Blueprint's goals because, like I say, you guys know better than I do, but a ninth grade isn't a ninth grader isn't a ninth grader. That is,
very true.
and it's just there has, and you see it in athletics, you see it in academics. Kids mature at a different rate, and it makes a giant difference.
That is a wonderful point, Mr. Kyler. And there are a lot of very intelligent freshmen and sophomores that don't have the maturity to dedicate the time to some of these classes. And I think there are parents that know their child and they're like, talk to us when they're a junior, not now. And you have to respect that at the school level.
And we also have many students who have part-time jobs in the community. And so they oftentimes are in the counselor's office, oftentimes with their parents, making that tough decision about, can I spend more time on my coursework, or, would that mean that I would have to cut back on my hours at work? And in some cases, the money that they're earning really needs to come into the household. And so we try to respect that as well, and where each family is.
Lots of purposeful planning goes into that scheduling development for our students at all levels, and it's differentiated as well. And we obviously we want to always encourage students to take advantage of AP or transcripted courses, but for some students, encouraging participation in an honors course is a big piece as well too, and especially building upon those individual student strengths. Student might do very well in the humanities, but struggle a little bit more in the sciences. So let's push them in the humanities where that is their strength, or whatever that strength may be. And our schools work very hard to make sure that we're doing that, and we will continue to do that to make sure we're meeting individual needs of students.
And I wanted to circle back to something Ms. Herbert said earlier about the AP classes, right? Like trying to convince kids to take the AP classes and, and then not taking the test and things like that. Like I also want to keep in mind how the 4-mod day might impact AP classes, and also how the 4-mod day might get impacted by the blueprint, right, from a planning time perspective, and things like that. Because I think one of the things that I saw with my own kids with AP is that it's very tough with a 4-mod day, because you're either taking the AP class in the fall and then having to wait to take the test until May, or you're taking AP in the spring and then you're racing to get all the material in, and you don't get it all in time. So both sets of kids are at a disadvantage for some reason under the 4-mod day, right, where it would work, I think, a whole lot better if you had the course the whole year, up until the test being in May. I think I'd love to see how our AP results compare to other counties in the state, to see if we think there's any kind of correlation with the 4-mod day, because I think we're the only county that does the 4-mod day. So I'm just curious to
No.
see if we're not the only county. Okay.
No. Do we know at this point how many others are using 4-mod?
I can't give you that information, but
Yeah.
I do remember when Mr. Johnson put a ton of time into this issue and didn't, at least in the state of Maryland, I feel like I remember a board work session where it was about 50-50, that
Yeah.
there was no major impact,
Yeah.
positive or negative.
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess I'm just curious as to, with the blueprint coming down and with the planning time requirements, how I'm sure there's probably a way to do it, but it seems like it makes the 4-mod day even that much more difficult to accomplish under the blueprint. So curious to see how that will kind of play out.
And I think that's something, without COVID, we may have talked about. The 4-mod day, I was never a big fan, and it has its pluses, it has its minuses, but I know one of my kids, as soon as they instituted, he decided he couldn't afford to take phys ed anymore because he couldn't waste a quarter of his day on it, so he got up at 6 and went to Four Seasons and did phys ed. So he could have 4 days with AP classes and whatever. And a student shouldn't have to make that choice. And again, we probably weren't good parents, but he made that choice. We didn't make him do it.
That's probably true. Mr. Tyler, this Ron is perfect, so. I would like to put this out on the table, that I think we need to look at that 4-mod day in a work session and look at hybrid, whatever, because I know with my daughter, she ended up taking all her classes, her math classes, like her 9th and 10th grade year, and by the time she went to Western Maryland McDaniel, well, it was like she needed refresher courses because of that. And if you take those AP tests and you have them in the fall, You forget everything in the spring. I think a hybrid. I lived through it. I did the 7-mod day. I've done the 4-mod day, and maybe a hybrid would work. Because let me tell you, 47 minutes in phys ed does not work.
I know.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain
And
things
there
that
are
work
certain
well with.
Things, yes, and that's why I think maybe a hybrid. We should look at that. But I'm also concerned about the continuity of having these classes and then taking the AP test at the end of the year, because it's not fair to the students. And I can understand to that point if they had it the first semester and then they take the test in May. That's tough. That is tough. So I just think, and I'm glad you brought that up, Donna, because Ms. Bigney, I really do.
We do still, we pay teachers for review sessions, and I know that is not
Absolutely.
the same.
I know.
But we do still offer that, so.
Just something else to
Sure.
keep us busy. But I think we need to look at it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think Blueprint's going to force us to
And
look
your
at it.
children are going through it right now,
They
Ms.
are.
Savigny, and
They are.
you're hearing both sides of what's going on and what's not going on. And, but I just, that's something we need to look at with the way things are laid out. I really do, because we want our students to do well
Yeah, absolutely.
and retain what they've learned.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. King. All right. And then the last
Mr.
part.
Shockney,
I'm
do you mind if I
sorry.
ask a
Pardon
quick
me.
question? Are we seeing a difference in or shift of students shifting from AP courses over to dual enrollment, or are those growth rates the same?
We're
proportionately?
definitely seeing a shift.
Okay.
Yes.
So more kids are
Why do you
moving
think
towards
that?
the dual enrollment versus AP?
I mean, I think there's a lot of factors. I think they enjoy the flexibility of dual enrollment. It's not every day. It's not as many seat hours. The off day, oftentimes they have like an office hours and they can work one-on-one with the teacher. And I think if you were staying in the state of Maryland, then the transfer of the credits is pretty much assured to you. Now, that is not the case if you leave the state of Maryland or many other universities.
Ballgame.
So, and that's what I know. I've spoken to Ms. Nicola many times, their counseling supervisor, that as students are exploring that, they want an answer from their counselor that's black and white. And the reality is, it is based on what you're going to do and what you're going to do and what your child is going to do. So, dual enrollment was new a few years ago, and then we started to offer it in the schools. It's become quite popular, and obviously at the Westminster area schools and some of the others, going to the campus has been very popular, and it's a great place. But I think that's something that we want to continue to define better, because it depends on the goal of the individual student. And for a lot of kids, you will go back to hybrid, some AP courses and some dual enrollment might be the perfect solution for them. But that's something we spend a lot of time on in a lot of meetings to try to navigate it so that, as Mr. O'Neill mentioned, we have a pathway to earn the associate's degree, but that the wonderful aspects of AP are still being explored by the students that truly would benefit from it.
Yeah, I was going to say, just from my experience this year, visiting colleges and stuff, I mean, some colleges are like, oh, we don't accept that. But one college is like, oh, yeah, that's a half a year you don't have to worry about. So it definitely depends.
Yes.
And I think those things, too, if we can capture that when a student starts talking to their counselor, like, this is what I'm interested in, start talking about, well, these are the colleges that would accept that,
Absolutely.
wherever that may be.
Yes.
So I think that's another thing we need to make sure we're definitely capturing with every student when they're planning it.
Thank you, Mr. King.
Yes, you're welcome.
All right, and then the final priority focus area under Pillar 1 was an all-student group, and that was focused on improving performance on MCAP. All I did for this was, this was data already in the previous plan. I just added a column for the status based upon the target for 18-19. So again, there's no new data here. This is old data that has been presented before, just broken down by ELA and then mathematics as well. And we have Dr. Hart and Ms. Wilder-Schaefer here as well. But again, we are anticipating, MSD has said December or January. I'm going to say January at a minimum. When I hear them give 2 months of a range, who knows? Maybe we'll get it in December, but I'm thinking January before we'll have last year's MCAP data, unfortunately, which is difficult. At that point in time, it's obviously, all data is important data, but it makes it harder for us to use that in a meaningful way, being, in January when we're halfway through the year.
And that's absolutely ridiculous that we are not going to get those numbers, because we needed them in September to plan ahead. And that is not fair to our students in Carroll County. And I know they don't like us anyway, but I'm just telling my 2 cents worth on that, because somebody didn't do their job, or they're playing with the numbers or something. But Carroll County needs their numbers. Get off your high horse and get them to us.
And that's what I was gonna say.
I'm sick of it.
What is the advantage of waiting if the numbers are right now? Release them.
That's what I've heard from a couple teachers too, is like, I would love to know what I need to do, going ahead, going into next year, I can't, because I don't know what it looked like. So
Right.
it
And we
is,
do
it's
need-
really
We
frustrating.
essentially you lose the whole year by
Absolutely.
not getting the data until January. I
But
mean,
we do have to do a shout out for everybody from Senator Reedy on down that has helped and been on WBAL and they've all sent letters and all that, trying to get us help. Because we are at a disadvantage, and our students are at a disadvantage.
Right.
And that's not right.
and maybe we can do a shout out to the Carroll County Times, and they can throw
Yes,
in they can
you
throw,
know.
they can throw in
You
too
put
and
me
say
down
we
on that
need the
one.
data from the
I don't
state.
care, because they need to get their act together, because this is Carroll County and our children need data so we can help them out.
Okay. All right.
Well, and I think that we're also going to need to add. I totally agree. They need to release the data, because we need to be able to understand what's going on so we can help our kids. And holding on to it is unconscionable at this
Release
point.
it and say it's tentative.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not final, but at least they can give us some indications of what direction things are going, and where the biggest holes are.
Right. And the state, if you come to my house tomorrow, my Jack Russell will meet you at the door. So,
I was going to say, did you bring a pitchfork today?
oh my.
But the other thing that we're going to need to add into this is the science numbers, right? And so those they did actually release, and I think there's some interesting things to note there. So we were not tracking that as part of the 5-year plan, because those numbers were not available or tracked really at that level. But I think what it said was, and I don't have the numbers in front of me or with me, but I think that Carroll County was number 1 in 5th grade science in the state, but then we dropped off to like 6th or 7th or something like that in 8th grade science. So trying to understand what's going on with middle school science curriculum. Is there something? Is there a root cause of something going on there that would cause us to drop that
Right.
that heavily from 5th to 8th grade?
Yeah, we have to take the time to look at the data that just came in for science, compare it to what we've had in the past. Generally, how have our students done at 5th and then 8th, or elementary versus middle, and then versus the higher level courses in high school. But yes, and I think even though we won't be comparing apples to apples necessarily, we'll still see where are we our strongest and where are we at our weakest, elementary, middle, high.
Okay, I just wanted to share. Hi, I'm Lauren. For MCAP, as far as our administration in the spring, we have obviously, we haven't received any results. That's because we're going through a standard setting process for all of the results so they can determine our new scoring, our Lexile ranges, and things like that. So we haven't given a full administration of MCAP at all yet. So our spring administration was the first time doing that, which typically they take 6 to 8 months to get us scores, results, and how they will compare overall. So that's what we're waiting for. And just to clarify, December, January is probably when we'll receive individual scores, probably not county and state scores at that time. For comparison purposes, as we like to look at, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to Pillar 2, Family and Community Partnerships. There are several priority focus areas here. The first one I'll highlight are percentage of schools participated in the Community Advisory Council, or CAC, meetings. The baseline in 17-18 was 35%, and performance last year in 21-22 was 66%, just shy of the target. We're a little bit shy of the target. But again, I think definite progress over the baseline. And then working down from there, there are several different areas that had indicators associated with them. The first one listed is performance on the Msde climate survey. That's difficult because I do not believe that it has been administered since the 17-18 school year. So there's no new data to report there. The next one is international telephone line and email requests. You can see those numbers increase significantly over the years, with the baseline of 6,500 and then the performance being 7,546, which is short of our target of 10,000.
Mr. Shockney, do you know what would be the cause of that number dropping off in 21-22?
Ms. Burns? Come on up.
I think the change is, so in 2000,
Come on up, because you'll need the microphone.
so 2020 and 21 is when we were going through COVID, right? So that's why the numbers were very high there, 9,185. But 21, 22 is when we started having students going back for certain part of the day back to school. So that's why it was the difference. So when we were during COVID, parents needed help with interpretation, requests, teachers needed to contact parents. So we were extremely busy that year.
Mm-hmm.
When we started going back gradually back into the schools, that's when we saw the numbers changing a little bit.
Okay.
So students were able to take care of things themselves in school, and there wasn't as much a need for
teachers and parents.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the wraparound services that we do for kids, I think, is reflective of that and the targeted supports there. But it makes sense during especially that year where, we started to open and return, that there were lots of requests for support. And Ms. Burns and her team are incredibly responsive. So that makes sense. And it makes sense, the dip. And again, sometimes, a decrease isn't necessarily a bad thing, because I think it shows that we're covering, and providing supports, proactively as opposed to reactively at times as well too. So
I think we might want to rethink what some of our targets are, because we're expecting those to continue to increase over time. So I can understand how, the pandemic might have been a little bit of a blip with a decrease, but if we truly are expecting or wanting these to increase over time, then that would be an area that would want to throw some focus on, if we believe that actually is impacting the performance levels of our minority kids. If we think that this is a good indicator of the performance of our minority kids, then we want to focus on making sure that we get those interactions up.
right.
Well, and again, it is showing that the parents are reaching out, and it does have an effect on the academic achievement. So I don't think we would want to get rid of it totally, certainly. I think it is something good to track.
Oh, no, I think we definitely want to keep tracking it if we think that it is a leading
You see the
indicator of
connection.
how the performance of our minority kids is doing.
And the population
But the
growth.
fact that it's dropped off, right? Like when we were continuing to expect the targets to increase, then might warrant a little bit of special attention to see what's going on there.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's good when you have the conversations, because there are always some explanations as to why the data is looking as it looks. So I think, you've done a nice job with sharing, some feedback on that.
thank you, Ms. Burns.
Mr. Carroll, did you have a question? Okay.
I'm going to answer the question coming down the road here.
You want to go ahead, or you want me to keep going?
Keep going, darling.
Okay, all right. Here we go. So the next one, we have participation in the Culture Expo, and we had a baseline of 28 and 17, 18, and then the Culture Expo we changed the format into an equity day of learning in August of 2021, and we had 301 participants there. So again, that was a different format, different structure, probably difficult to compare the previous event to that event. The next one listed, and I apologize, there's a formatting error. The targets for the next one should be kind of one space below. and that is family participation and special education family support nights. Baseline in 17-18 was 74. Performance in 21-22 was 242. That met the target established for that year, and the target for 22-23 is 250. Those 220 and 250 should be down one space. I apologize for that. The next one is family participation in at least one Title I family engagement activity. Baseline performance was 20%. Performance last school year was 30.75% with a target of 65%. There is some question, I think, about the 65% from the 2021 school year. Again, that was our big COVID recovery year as well. And again, that number was extraordinarily high, which is a good thing. There was lots of outreach and participation that year. But if you compared the 30.75, obviously, to our baseline and then our first 2 years of performance, I think it's relatively it relatively trends with some of our other data points of a dip. But again, some progress over the baseline.
Mr. Shockney, do you think that has anything to do with like virtual capability of some of those meetings?
Dr. Hart and I had this conversation earlier today. Go ahead, Dr. Hart.
That is absolutely correct. We feel that parents and families were home and they needed something to do. And so we saw a huge increase in our participation. And I want to give a shout out to our Title I parent liaisons at the Title I schools and the principals there, because we were able to buy the resources and make packages for each of the families to be able to participate. And we start talking about our families in poverty. Sometimes it's hard once they get home to come back to the school, whether it's transportation or family obligations. And so we saw a decrease now that we're back to the in-person model. So we have been having the conversation, do we want to continue with the in-person, which we love to have, and we love the interaction, and our teachers are able to work with students and families in smaller groups and settings, or do we want to go back to the virtual model? But I will tell you, with the virtual model, we did allocate extra funds for that piece for the family engagement. It's a mandatory set aside where I have to do a calculation based on the actual award amount that we received from the Maryland State Department of Education. And so we had to increase the amount. It's a number that you can't go below, but you can go above that number. And we had to increase because, of course, it was more costly to buy materials for each of the homes for everybody to use. But we had a significant increase when we turned to the virtual model. And then at the same time, you knew that everybody was at home. And so when you're home, you needed something to do as far as students and families. And so we just saw an increase in parent involvement and family involvement, because we did activities that not only involved the students, but also the parents as well. So we saw a huge increase, and we would love to keep those numbers.
Right. Well, that's what I was wondering, because, it did drop off to 30.75% this past year, but that's still a good number compared to, what we were experiencing pre-pandemic. But I think we set the 65 and the 60 targets much like during the pandemic.
Yes, it started at least 30%.
Right. Right,
With
and then all of a sudden it got ratcheted up to 65 or 60. So I was just trying to understand, okay, is that really a sustainable level? And is it something that we want to be doing, but it would need to be on a virtual level, and we'd need to allocate more funds to it? So just trying to understand.
And you have to understand, we also aren't competing, we weren't competing with sports and other activities during the pandemic as well, because right now some families go home and then they go to basketball practice and baseball practice and dance class and ice skating rinks or wherever that they're going. During the pandemic, everyone was home. Right. And so that gave more time for families to be involved.
I think a lot of it too, you got families that went back to work, so the evening time is, you got one that stays home with the younger one while another one goes to work, and vice versa. So I think that's probably an impact of it.
And back to Mrs. Civilini's point, 30% is usually the average that we try to work towards, because we know that there are other barriers for families. And let me also add, for our Title I parent liaisons and our principals, when we see a pattern of families who never participate, because we have our goal is of families participating in at least one or more events, we reach out to those families to see what we can do differently, what could we do to help engage them, what the interests are, and then we work with our personnel workers if needed, as far as maybe transportation or finding the resources that a family may need. But we developed a attendance tracker. Yep. And I used to bug Mr. Shockney about that as well, because he was going to use it in special ed as well. But we worked with Jen Seashall and her team to create a technology program that we use as an attendance tracker to be able to track the number of families that are involved in our events. And we're proud of that, and we're also happy that we're able to use that across the county, not just in Title I, but we use that as a resource to find out who's attending and who's not attending, and then what type of events do we have larger crowds compared to other events.
And how does that work? Again, I know we had talked about, I remember hearing the conversation before. Do parents just come in and sign in on a paper form, and then the next day someone has to input all of that information, or?
That is absolutely correct. Parents sign in, and they sign in as far as the student grade, and you also give us your student's name, because sometimes the last names don't match. And then back to our wonderful Title I parent liaisons, they come in that following day and they put all of that into the attendance tracker.
Yeah, because it would be great if parents could just come right in and sign in on the computer themselves, I guess, or, anyway.
That'll
I
be
didn't
the
know
next
whether that had
step.
changed or not, but I remembered the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Continuous improvement, right?
All right. And our next one is partnerships with local government, businesses, and agencies in support of students, student learning aligned to specific pillars of the strategic plan. We previously reported 71 partnerships. That is a number that I would say remains unchanged, and probably something that we should take a look at. Obviously, we want good, meaningful partnerships with our community and our support and our agencies to support our students. But we want meaningful partnerships as well. And again, I think that although recognizing our partnerships is important, I don't know if necessarily, personally speaking, if increasing it's all about the number. It's about meaningful partnerships, and sometimes with a limited number of partnerships, we have great support for our students, and sometimes we can grow that in time. But I think the key for that is having meaningful partnerships as we move forward. Ms. Herbert?
Now, are we still chasing these people down to do MOUs like the health department and the sheriff's department? Just tell me the truth.
So we still have, we are required in some areas to have MOUs, formal MOUs. In other areas, we've developed in the past, I'll say we think we've developed our own MOUs. We are not tracking down folks for MOUs currently beyond the required MOUs that we're required to have.
Yeah, because we lost a really big one due to track being hassled by MOU. I do believe they didn't give us a car. And I know there's other people out there that weren't happy about MOUs. They said, we've been working with the Board of Education for 25 years, and now they want this. And I knew we upset people in the community. I don't want people upset with the community. I want them to work with us. Mm-hmm. And, that was a biggie when we lost the car. So I'm just bringing it up because, they didn't want to be chased down. I don't know what the whole reason was. But, I want us to work together with our partners. And then family night, Title I will always remember this. I went to Elmer Wolf. Tracy up there, the principal, had the whole auditorium, gymnasium, cafeteria filled. Parents went home with crock pots, food, recipes, plants. And I really do believe that virtual is nice, but having them all in there together and seeing that we all can work together. That was a biggie. I will not forget that. And but virtual's great for some things, but not for me. And also, Tammy Chisholm.
Yes.
She's the one. Family night. That girl, she does a phenomenal job. I'm all the time receiving emails and contacting parents, and that's why that is such a good activity.
Yep.
So I wanted to talk about those three.
Excellent.
And getting back to, our MOUs, we are taking the time to look at the MOUs that we have, look at the partnerships we have, and determine what is a partnership, what do we need an MOU for, what needs to be in that MOU, and what are just interagency agreements. For instance, Youth Services Bureau or the Sheriff's Department, we are required to work with them in certain ways. So many of us would not necessarily call that a partnership. And so we're looking at what we have and what needs to be done, what maybe needs to be clarified or rewritten in the MOUs, and And we've been using Ed O'Malley for some of those conversations. And when we look to fill Judy Jones's position, that's something that they will take over as well, is those community relations and the MOUs and partnerships that come from that.
Thank you for that info, because I know there's some ill feelings out there in the community.
But we do need consistency and we do need quality.
Great.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask, as far as like when we've done the navigating the waters, do we get good feedback from our partners, regarding, them coming out, the family seeing what is being offered? And
Most definitely, and we're always receptive. Obviously, we want the feedback, and we're responsive to it as well too. So as we, look to host a subsequent event the following year, obviously we're building that off of the strengths and what worked well, and addressing, any challenges that we may have had. But yeah, definitely that feedback is very important.
because I did notice, from the first one to the second one, I don't think we did the second one in person because of COVID, but I mean, you could tell there was a bigger presence, and
Sure.
so I think those collaborations continue going on. I mean, they're phenomenal, and even with the internships that we're starting to look at through Career and Technology Center and everything. I mean, those things continue to be extremely important.
So what we're looking at doing this year, instead of one event for navigating difficult waters, because we haven't gotten the parent turnout that we were looking for. We had a lot of our community partners or agencies come out, but we really have not gotten the turnout. We're going to do something a little bit different this year. We're going to have 3 different nights throughout the year, and each will focus on something a little bit different that Navigating Difficult Waters tried to hit on. But we think, if a parent's concern is, drug awareness, or if a parent's concern is mental health, anxiety, there should be a different night for that. And then we can really focus the event on whatever that issue is, and provide more information and support to the families who come to that event. So we'll go from 1 to 3 and focus it a little bit more.
I like that idea. Can we add naloxone training to one of those evenings? Because I think that's something important too, because a lot of parents don't know where to get naloxone training. So if one of those was like particular naloxone training at a drug presentation, and the dangers in the room, I think from the state's attorney's office too.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Yeah, perfect, awesome.
And Mr. Shockney, I just wanted to make a comment about the 71 partnerships. I don't know that was necessarily ever meant to be like a performance indicator, that we want that number to grow substantially over time. I think that was meant to be more of an awareness thing for the community. Like people will come out making statements like, well, you should be partnering with this organization or with that organization. And usually our answer was, we already do.
Yes.
And so it was really just kind of an awareness thing for the community to say, here are all the partnerships that we have and all the organizations that we do work with. But I don't, this isn't a typical like performance indicator that you would look at and say, well, we want that 71 to grow,
Yes.
By 10% over time or 20% over time. No, that's not what that was meant to be. So
Yep. And Ms. McCabe, said it perfectly in the fact that I think we just need to take a revisit things, take a look at how do we formalize our partnerships, what requires an MOU, what doesn't require an MOU, and obviously keep things simple but yet beneficial for our students. Okay. All right, moving on to successful workforce, I'll turn things over to Mr. O'Neill. There's the clicker, sir.
Okay, Pillar 3 has to do with developing and supporting a successful workforce, and generally objectives have to do with recruiting and retaining a highly qualified, highly effective workforce whose demographic as a workforce reflects that of our school community, or in other words, our students. And I'll cover the priority focus areas really fast if that's okay, and then flip to the next sheet because I think it's a little easier to talk about performance looking at the data over time, the longitudinal data. So with the last iteration of the strategic plan, and quite frankly, these first 2 priority focuses have been there from the first version. We had 2 priority focus areas. One, to sort of look more at recruitment and whether or not we're recruiting a workforce that more closely resembles the student demographic. We, and I'll mention this again when we flip to the next screen, but we originally, in 2017, 2018, when we looked at that data as a baseline, we tried to do something that we regretted in hindsight. And so the data you're seeing here for baseline data actually reflects 2018 to 2019. And I'll touch on why that was in a second. The second focus area here was that we would retain our workforce in a manner so that our retention rate for minority employees is equal to the retention rate for our majority employees. That actually would therefore become a moving benchmark over time, so that those would always be equal. And then lastly, at our last work session, which I think from memory was 2 summers ago, we brought forward this recommendation and discussed it with the board. And that is that we would set a baseline of open contracts offered to minority candidates, and then try to build a performance measure from there of increasing those contracts offered by 25%. We need to reconsider that with you tonight, and we have already reconsidered that with our own internal work. And I'll touch on that on the next screen, and I'll be calling on Mr. Burkhouse, who doesn't even know that, to help me explain why as we're talking through this. And then the last thing I wanted to mention as I flip, you might recall from that last work session, we had brought as well a performance or a priority focus area that would have been to administer an annual engagement survey to our minority employees, and then look at a certain question on that survey as a measure of job satisfaction or job comfort. Based on the conversation that evening, I think particularly Board Member Herbert, but others as well, and then Dr. Lockhart at the time's initiative to do a more comprehensive climate survey across the system, which Ms. McCabe is now working on and figuring out. We abandoned that because it would be superseded by that greater climate survey. So in case anyone remembered that and wondered what happened to it, I just wanted to remind everyone of that's the direction we're headed.
I kept on asking.
You did indeed. And did I flip that or did you? I don't even realize what I'm doing right now. I have flipped ahead. So when we tried to initially set the baseline for the first priority focus area, basically of recruiting a more diverse workforce, what we tried to do in that initial year was to establish a July 1st set of data, baseline set of data, and that doesn't work well because the entire structure of reporting in Maryland is predicated upon doing your annual staffing report in October, which gives you and the whole state sufficient time to have had a full recruitment season, have everyone hired for that school year, have them in place, have them in your data set. That's when we turn in the historic report of hiring to the State Department of Education, and kind of all of the state data is driven off of that. But that first year we tried to use a July date and just sort of run our own data, and realized in hindsight that data is not going to be as accurate as the October report that we turn into Msde and also historically have presented to this Board of Ed in either October or November. So we reset the baseline for the 2018-19 year using the October set of data instead of trying to use the July set of data. And therefore, I guess what I'm saying is, at that time and now, I really can't attest to the accuracy of that 4.10% in 17-18, but that measure was used to set the initial performance targets of improving our diversity to 5% when we reset the baseline to 2018-2019, which turned out to be a much higher number of 4.8%, although all of these numbers are small, I understand. We then made the decision, which you kind of agreed to in that work session, to change the ultimate performance indicator to a 6% figure. So hopefully that kind of explains why it was, why the baseline is 2018-2019 and why initially it was a 5% marker, and whether we were meeting that or not, and why it became a 6% marker for the end of the plan. And in this case, that last year's worth of data is real data for this hiring year, and so therefore in this one instance the plan is sort of complete over a 5-year window because we know our hiring data. And we've done really, really well in the sense that we've met our measures. I want to be careful because I simultaneously want to thank Mr. Diaz and his staff. And if Mr. Diaz had this microphone, he would be the first to tell you that while human resources ultimately will be accountable for our recruitment and retention, we're not staffed in a way that they are solely responsible for it. So a large number of folks in this school system participate in the recruitment cycle. All of our content supervisors and assistant supervisors and other instructional department folks go out on recruitment trips and interview candidates in the initial screening, and then certainly our school-based administrators have the follow-up interview and make the recommendations for folks who get hired. And everyone deserves a lot of credit and a lot of gratitude for their efforts in that regard. And it's nice to have some successes here and to see some successes trending positively, and I want to celebrate that, and I mean that. And at the same time, you know, I do want to have a couple of caveats here that that being said, we are far, far from meeting the ultimate goal of having a workforce whose demographic reflects that of our community. And so if you were to look, and again, with an attempt to always try to use a single data source that will always be there and be consistent, what we look for from a human resources lens is the October release of the State Department of Ed's student enrollment reports as well. And so if you look at their most recent report, which would reflect last year's enrollment or October of last year, they show our overall student diversity demographic of being more like 19.8 or 19.9%, depending on how you want to round. And so while this shows some success, and we're happy about that, and we're grateful for that, and we'll continue those efforts in earnest, we're still significantly far from where we know we need to be. Also, and I don't know what to say about this other than it is, like Mr. Shockey's referenced in other regards, this also reflects 2 years where recruitment was very, very different than most years because it was pandemic related. It was a lot more online recruitment. This year opened up again to look something much more like traditional recruitment, but in some cases there were still some venues we might attend that weren't available, and you know, that sort of thing. So I wanted to try to mention all of those things here. Retention rates, and again, this.
But before you drop down to that, I'm curious, and I asked the same thing about students, the 2 or more races, 17, 10, 333. That's the most inconsistent group there, and I look at it. I know my 2 grandkids. One day they're black, one day they're white. They're never 2 or more. Is part of it how that's categorized or how it's tracked, or if they change what they do? It just seems that number's so inconsistent.
So it's certainly self-selected, and this kind of gets into the discussion of the open contracts offers in a way. So we cannot, and this is why that last one needs to be revisited. And I tell you, I sat here and recommended it and realized later, well, that wasn't so wise, John. We cannot legally ask a candidate for their racial identifiers. What we can do legally is have, separate from your actual application, a form you fill out as a candidate that later could be married to you as an employee, but while you're still a candidate, we can't know that information. And so in that sense, it's somewhat self-selected, but I don't have a sense that that folks too frequently, and maybe if Mr. Diaz knows otherwise, he can certainly comment. I'm not aware of folks coming into human resources with any, you know, in any often kind of way to say, I want to update my race or ethnicity. So it may just be a reflection of certain retention and attrition movement in that particular group of employees. But since you've raised it, let me just finish that out, and I'll look to Mr. Burkhouse if he wants to offer a more eloquent legal lens of this. At the time that last performance priority focus area seemed like a really good idea, because if you are offering more open contracts, and budgetarily we've been able to do a little more of that lately than we have been able to do over, say, the last decade. It seems like the more outreach you have, the more offers you make. That's certainly a good thing. But because of what I just said, it's very hard to piece that data back together in hindsight. And so the number of 16 that you saw as a baseline is really reflective of more of what our recruiters were reporting to us rather than what we actually know, because legally we can't know. And then maybe more importantly, with some hindsight, what you really see is how many folks actually accepted those open contracts, assuming, and again, assuming those two data sets are the same. And so what Mr. Diaz and I have been speaking about over the subsequent couple of years is maybe the more important measure is minority applicants who were hired via an open contract. Because if you're offering more, if you're identifying quality candidates up front and screening them up front and offering them more open contracts anyway, then you would hope in the ultimate measure you would see growth in the area of folks who at this point are our employees, and we can truly legally understand what they're identifying as their race and ethnicity.
Yeah, how do you accurately track something you legally can't ask them about?
That's a nice way of saying what I've been trying to, we can't, and so to have that performance, that measure there is perhaps not so meaningful. And Dave, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I think it's just reflective of the fact that under both state and federal civil rights law, that having that type of information as an employer that's hiring makes employers more likely to give that information dispositive effect. In other words, to make hiring decisions based on it, and those immutable characteristics are not supposed to be the basis for employment decisions in Maryland or on the federal level. So. The EEOC and the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, I think it's an easy choice for them to make, to say, look, you can't make decisions on information that you don't have. And so it helps employers stay out of trouble.
And again, that's on the actual application that you're referring to, right? Because again, when a person is selected to come in to be interviewed,
I
whether
think
they've identified or not.
to
I mean,
make
you see who's coming
another
in.
analogy to an issue in employment that comes up, that I think we can all understand that no one would want to go to a job interview and be asked if they were pregnant, and then be told later that really didn't have anything to do with whether we hired you or not. I think most women would be like, I think it was probably inappropriate to have asked.
Yeah, we know that's a no-no as far as asking that. I was wondering if we finished with that, I was wondering, we've always talked about how we do want to have our staff reflective of the student population. So in looking at these numbers, can they be married with the student breakdown so we can see how that is comparing?
They certainly easily can. I can actually give those to you now if you want for your own sake,
Sure.
but we can also email them in a manner where you have them for reference. So
Yeah, I'd
and
like that.
And again, I'm referring to MSDE's October report on student enrollment demographics.
Yeah, because at one point, didn't we see even the breakdown by different jobs within the school system?
Yes, that was an idea we threw out during that work session. That there seemed to be some concerns from the board or some members of the Board of Ed over whether or not that would be an effective measure when you could have certain departments where the difference of one individual could dramatically change the data. So we kind of vacated keeping that as a measurement in your strategic plan. That doesn't mean that we don't have those data and reference those in our daily work or our ongoing work.
We even saw school breakdowns, didn't we?
We certainly have
Yeah, I
those
think at
data
one point
available.
we saw that.
In someplace we saw, I thought, Carroll County, students and faculty, all three different numbers.
Yeah, and then you could see the professional staff and,
Yes.
the clerical staff,
Yes,
the
yes.
janitorial staff, so on, so.
We can produce any or all of that at any given time. The measure specific here ultimately is the student demographic, but we can look at the community as a whole, just the students as a subset of the community versus our population. We can get into each department, each school, grade levels for that matter.
Again, my initial thought is, show me what the student
Sure.
breakdown is.
So-
Because I know the objective basically speaks of the school system community. So are we talking about the community of learners or the
Yes.
students, or?
In this instance, that's specifically what we mean. And I'll read those to you for your sake now, but I'll also email those either directly or through any other follow-up that the superintendent and Mr. Shockney have. So for African-American students, the percentage is 4.6%. And I'm reading these in the order that they're
Okay.
on this slide. For American Indian / Alaska Native students, it is 0.1%. For Asian students, it is 3.1%. For white students, it is 80.1%. For Hispanic students, it is 7.8%, and that is our most rapidly growing percentage. For Pacific Islander, 0.3%, and 2 or more races, and I'm getting further away from myself here, 3.9%. I think that's what my own handwriting says.
Okay.
So that seems pretty on target. The way I'm reading it, it seems like the percentage is meeting the employment. You know what I mean? Like the amount of white white employees, percentage of students, and how it's all broken down. So there is representation.
There are some, and certainly, if I'm following that question, Ms. Battaglia, the overall measure being presented and monitored here as part of your plan is not to, it's simply in the aggregate to increase the percentage of non-majority employees, not necessarily to look at each group and say, okay, if there are 4.6% of African-American students, then we're going to try to have 4.6% of African-American employees. We're far from being able, I think, to pursue anything like that in a meaningful way. I'll also tell you that if you were to see these numbers over a long period of time, it's an area where we have been deficient for a long period of time, and also an area that is moving away from us more quickly than we're keeping up. And I probably should have prefaced everything with that comment as well. So we are still one of the least diverse counties in the state. If you look at the state on a whole, we're the third least diverse school system in the state, behind Garrett and Allegheny respectively. But we are significantly, well, I don't know that that's a value word. We are much less diverse as a county than we were when I came to work here a little over a decade ago. And so we're chasing a target that's moving away from us, and we already had a lot of work to do to try to get there. And so there's a lot of work and a lot of challenges here.
Okay.
When you said county, I think you meant district. When you came here as a district, the district was more
The
diverse.
system.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. And then I don't want to leave, I didn't touch the retention yet. I want to just make sure we discuss that. So here's an area where we've sort of been a little bit up and then down. And again, when you consider the baseline here, understand that the baseline's moving because the measures to have our retention rate of minority employees mirror that of majority or non-minority employees. And so we've kind of fluctuated here, and I'm not sure strategically what to make of that yet. That's something we need to tease out. I'm hopeful that eventually, as we move to a climate survey, maybe that will provide some feedback that could be worked on here. We actually had 1 year a year ago where our retention rate for minority employees exceeded the retention rate for non-minority employees. And then this past year, our retention rate was down across the board for all employees, but a significant drop certainly for minority employees. And in the aggregate, we get asked that question a lot. In the aggregate, meaning why did our retention rate dip a little bit? First of all, I'm not yet sure that our retention rate dipped differently or more significantly than other Maryland school systems. We should be able to have those data soon and know that for sure. And honestly, anything that I would say is admittedly speculative, and I've tried to always say that when I've been asked this question. But and you can see it on the screen, there were years, or a year during the pandemic, where our retention rate actually improved or exceeded what we would have expected. And I don't know what to make of that. Anecdotally, something has changed in the world, in the workforce. I do believe that, and we are sort of figuring out a new normal going forward. And we see that in all categories of employment and in contracted services as well. And I don't know what it might be, and so again, this is highly speculative, but it might be that there was a lot of uncertainty with the pandemic, both from a health lens, also from an economic lens, and people who might have retired more normally in that 1 year held on for another year, and then people decided last year that, okay, now it is time for me to go ahead and make that decision. But that's a guess more than it is an actual understanding of what these data are telling us.
And Mr. O'Neill, I'd like to see that comparison as well, you know, how we compared to retention in other counties. Because this is certainly a phenomenon that's not just, you know, within education. I mean, the Great Resignation has happened across all industries, you know, people just moving around. There's just been so much movement from employees across every sector, across every industry. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we had a dip in retention. What I'd like to understand is if it was more significant than the dip that other counties were seeing.
And I
in their
think the
school
part
systems.
of it that's retirement is important, because I know in construction, we see an older workforce. So there's going to be more people retiring each year. And that's just a fact. And I don't know if that was the case in CCPS or not.
I think it was, and if Ernesto's shaking his head otherwise, then go with him. But and this is a little bit more than anecdotal.
He's saying he loves everything you're saying.
Everything I said. He was sharing data with me and others in fairly real time, and what I saw that looked different to me than any other year last year, any other year, period, over a long period of time, was that whereas you know most people have historically retired at the end of a school year, we saw sort of this incremental approach where people, and it might only be a couple of people a month, but that's unusual to have more than a few in a school year. People were retiring at the end of October and November and December, and so incrementally it added up, I think, to what would be a bigger than ordinary number. Where we would be is that Mr. Diaz and all of the Mr. Diaz's of Maryland would be compiling their hiring and staffing report to the state this month, and sometime in late October, November, Msde will turn around that data. So we'll know a lot more about our own data soon. We'll be able to then get that sort of comparative data probably in the November, December timeline.
And one other thing that this industry has and government that private industry doesn't, what percentage retired, and I know a lot of them, they retired just to double dip. They're not retiring. They're just technically retiring here so they can work in another system.
And to some extent, we can know that, and we certainly also can know how many rehired retirees we ourselves have hired as well, so that those data
that's
will
true
be
too.
available.
They do it both ways.
And then I know Mr. Shockney's telling me to move on, probably.
Before
The
we go
last
on,
thing- the last thing
can I
I
just say
wanna
something,
mention-
Mr. O'Neill?
Oh,
But
sure.
before we go on, again, for the retention rates, for the number of years, the majority of years, the minority retention rate is less than.
Yes.
So we can't lose track of that.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. The other questions before I?
I was just gonna say, I know Superintendent McCabe had said at the CAC meeting, you know, it's nationwide, and it's a lot of people are, you know, they're retiring to essentially, you know, work from home. Because a lot of people liked having that convenience when that was offered due to the pandemic. But, you know, yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. It's not just us. It's not just this school system. It's everywhere. All different, on different angles everywhere. So it's interesting to see how the workforce is changing.
Absolutely, it's interesting.
So
On
we
a
get-
regular
yeah.
basis.
We get more of that data, though, in October, or once you've worked through your...
October, November, certainly,
okay.
and I think we'll probably be discussing these data relative to the blue. This is another, pretty much this would be true for everything, but another area that the blueprint touches on. It requires an annual report, which is due in July, but to their credit, they did link this to the MSDE reports in October. So we and every other Maryland school system have to produce something under the blueprint called the Hiring Practices and Diversity Report. And we'll have to sort of see how this or any of the things we've been talking about will play out in the comprehensive implementation plan under the blueprint. But what we do now know that we haven't known up until this meeting, as in terms of talking about the blueprint with you, is that we fully expect that the AIB will receive the state comprehensive implementation plan, which I'm choosing to think of as sort of the model plan that each of us will have to work with at their October 13, I believe it's the 13th meeting. It'll be presented to them then, and we're hopeful, based on what they've said, that within about a week, that plan would be available to locals. And your plan, our plan, is due to the state on March 15th. So if a draft is out now, that's better than what I was hoping for, which was going to be more like December or January. So we'll, and when I say will, I mean all of us will begin to get our hands on that and break it into pieces and look at what we might be looking at here. But this might be another area impacted by that as well. And then I'll jump ahead for Mr. Shockney's sake and move to Pillar 4. I think I'm going to handle the first couple of items here, and then Mr. Shockney will pick up on the student referral and discipline data. So for the first two priority focus areas, the first one deals with school safety and security. And just as a quick reminder for all of you, I know some of you were here from the very beginning, but also for the public, because we haven't yet moved forward with that item in the first focus area. I didn't want everyone to think that that's been sitting there for 5 years and nothing has been done. If you remember the earliest versions of our strategic plan, which, as Mr. Kyler says, is very much a living document, this focus area in the first version dealt with compliance with implementing the Safe Schools Act of 2018, and there was a tremendous amount of effort that had to go into that. You might recall Mr. Williams at that time and his presentations on this. We were able to accomplish those things sooner than we might have hoped, and so we were able to then narrow in on some other items where we felt like we could probably get to more of a telling data set, because some of those compliance items under the Safe to Learn Act were sort of things we had to do. They didn't necessarily all come with a piece of data that could be tracked and assessed over time. And by the way, while we're at that, one large part of that was implementing an SRO program. So again, a thank you to the commissioners and a huge kudos to Sheriff DeWeese. Where that left us after we said, hey, we actually accomplished those things a little bit sooner than we might have thought, we tried to hone in on something where we thought we could have a meaningful metric. We at first hoped that in the 21-22 school year, we would produce a new evaluation tool. So every school site under the Safe to Learn Act has to have an annual security evaluation. And at the time, our thought was we would create more of a paper version of that. And I think you even saw a paper version of that in the last work session on the plan. Subsequent to that, or maybe in real time as that meeting was happening, we decided, wouldn't it be even better if we could turn the evaluation tool into a computer-based or a device-based app? And so our technology services office took up the mantle. Ms. Seashell and her team were working very hard on that. We are actually using that tool now in the schools this fall. So we are building that baseline of data now. And more than just using that tool to move towards a dashboard, we're also working with Mr. Prokop and his staff to see if we can, where appropriate, link the results of the evaluation tool to our facilities work order system. So some of the things that they might assess, might be culture. Like, for instance, are there any doors propped because they shouldn't be, or an item like that. Other things that they might assess to follow that same example would be, are all of the doors working, or is there an issue with one of the doors? And for items like that, maybe a door not working, a lock not working, a camera that needs to be repositioned, or a camera not working, we'll be able to collect those data in a dashboard format. Those will help us make some capital decisions, such as which cameras are going to be prioritized to be replaced, for instance. But also, if we can directly tie in that door needing to be fixed or that other item needing to be fixed into Mr. Prokop's facilities work order, system. That saves some people a lot of work, but it also gives us some data we can look at, and not just to have the data and see how it looks over time, but also to say, okay, for those, and I'll just keep using the same one, for those doors that aren't working, that are generating work orders, what's our timeline to get those things remedied? How long from the time this tool generates a work order to that door is fixed? So whether that remains part of your strategic plan in the future or not, we're very excited to be able to have that tool and to be able to build towards that data. So that's something we're very much looking forward to. I know Mr. Pierce and Mr. Prokop are looking forward to. If you have any questions, either one of those gentlemen can help me answer those. And then I'm going to cover the FCI, Facilities Condition Index, before switching back to Mr. Shockney. This is a measure that really the Board of Ed wanted in the plan at the earliest version or the earliest iteration of the plan. And at that moment in time, which would have been the 17-18 baseline, your Facilities Condition Index system-wide was 31%. And so you said, let's set that as the measure to maintain that FCI score of 31%. And as you know, this is largely a function of capital investment and frankly not much else. So there's not much else that can be done other than you submit a capital plan, which you'll be voting on next week or in 2 weeks at your board meeting. And then it's up to the funding authorities to be able to do what they can to fund that plan. And so without a pretty significant annual infusion of capital funds, that score is naturally going to rise. And you can see that over time that score has been ticking up. What has helped in the last couple of years is when you have two large modernization projects going on, which hasn't been our case for a good number of years, then that does have a significant impact on that score and can bring it down a little bit. So I guess the way we look at it is none of us, and even you're sort of powerless other than to make the ask, but it is an important measure because you can look back at your requests under your CIP and say, were we requesting the funds that would have amounted to meeting this measure or not? And the answer is yes, you've been requesting the funds. The realities of what can be funded don't always match what that request is.
And again, this was a bit of an awareness item, right? Especially with the commissioners, where that FCI score was decreasing. It was increasing over time. We just weren't putting the money into the capital projects over time, and it was kind of an awareness and an education process for the commissioners to understand. We've got 40 plus buildings, right? We need to make sure that, if the average life of those buildings is 40 years, a shelf life is 40 years, then you need to be doing one a year. And, once we were getting through all the roofs and the HVACs and everything else, there needed to be modernizations happening. Like, we couldn't let the overall condition of the school system deteriorate, or we end up with a backlog that is unsustainable, right? So it was kind of an understanding and level setting of this much capital infusion needs to go in on an annual basis in order for the overall FCIs or condition index for the system for it to be stable.
Correct.
So I think that was something really helpful as part of our capital improvement plan. It's like, well, it doesn't necessarily. We need to be asking for $40+ million of capital improvements every year, and then we prioritize. Okay, what are the things that need to happen next, right? But it's not. But there just needs to be that consistent infusion every year.
I think Mr. Kyler needs to frame this and hang this in his new office so he can look at it.
Just the number 31 will
That's
be
right.
helpful.
Remember.
We are, just
Yes,
one
ma'am.
last FYI, we are moving forward in earnest and updating the functional assessment component to the next set of schools built. I think the target year was 1980 and after, so, and future versions of your educational facilities master plan bleeding into your CIP. Mr. Prokop's team is working right now, or getting ready to start work with Mr. Wernick's team to assess those next set of schools, and what that'll help you with is reassessing your priorities in order, which school modernization should be next in line.
I think the CIP said William Winchester was the next one.
Correct. Yeah. I think if Ray would shake his head, I think the date where we where we don't have up-to-date functional scores going forward is 80 with Liberty. Is he nodding yes?
Yes. He's nodding
I'm going to stop there then.
All right, our next priority focus area is creating a welcome culture of diversity, respect, and civility throughout CCPS. The first bullet point there is the development of a student perceptual survey, and that also connects with the next priority focus area, because obviously we have talked about developing a survey for staff as well as the community. Those surveys are in development. Ms. McCabe, do you
Yeah, I
want to
can
jump in
speak.
on that one a little bit?
Yes, we had decided in this last spring not to give the surveys at that time and to hold off until this school year. So at this point, we're finalizing all three of the surveys with school perceptions and determining what time period we want to give those surveys to our students, staff, and community. We don't want to give them too early in the school year because at this point, some of the opinions of the stakeholder groups may not have had time to be formed. So we're looking at giving it enough time so that when people take the survey, they'll have enough information to really give us some good data from which to plan.
Okay, and then the next piece, and going to your next page, which is our major referral data. If you take a look at this in the 21-22 school year, we saw significant increases in the number of discipline referrals in these major areas. But I will point out to everyone, as we all know, last year was a key year for us, with us being open for all students. And it was our opportunity to renorm our behavioral expectations with our students. So I don't think anyone wants to see more discipline referrals from a previous year. However, the function of that discipline referral is to communicate to that student and that student's family an expectation. And that's what happened last year. So as you take a look up there, you'll see significant increases in many of our areas. Now, there's roughly I think from baseline to next year's target, a 20% reduction. So the targets are 4% each year over the 5 years. So compared to our targets, we were up, but the targets were never developed, us responding to a pandemic. So although higher, I do think that was a significant opportunity for us to clearly put out our expectations for students. The other thing Mr. Streecker did in putting this data together, was to identify the number and percent of distinct students. So I think that's also very telling also. And I'll use elementary, for example. If you look at 4%, those referrals identified there came from 4% of our population at the elementary level. So we know our students that struggle either socially, emotionally, or behaviorally. We know that the pandemic had a significant impact on them as well as other students who are just returning and in school for the first time. We had lots of younger students.
Right.
This was their first experience. They did not get a preschool experience, which is uncommon. Most of our students come to us with having a very robust preschool experience, but a lot of students in the pandemic did not. So you can take a look there. The data, I think, speaks for itself.
Mr. Shockney, I'll just add that we knew this was coming when we met with principals before the 21-22 school year. We talked about discipline. We talked about the need for reteaching our expectations, making sure that we disciplined appropriately, and that we used positives as well, because you can't just use one or the other. And we also talked about the fact that low discipline numbers doesn't necessarily equal a safer school. And so our goal was to have safe schools for the future. And if that meant that in the meantime we needed to have higher discipline numbers, then so be it. But as Mr. Shockney said, we wanted to reset the standard and the expectation, and we really do believe that it worked. We, throughout the year last year, we saw some improvement, but we're really seeing the improvement this year.
Yeah, I think these numbers are not a surprise.
No.
And like you said, like we want these numbers to be real,
Yes.
right? Like we want to understand the magnitude of the situation, right? You don't want folks to not report them because that looks better,
Correct.
on our stats, right? Like we want to truly know what's going on.
Yep.
And I think we expected these numbers to go up dramatically. And, it's really telling. I think, we were looking at the elementary behavioral task force that we had a couple of years ago. We were looking at the number of distinct students because that was something that we saw, that it was a lot of the referrals were being driven by a small number of students having multiple referrals,
Yes.
right? And so, but when you look at the 1% in 2020 to 2021, but that was down from 3 is really probably more realistic, right? Because
Right.
the 2021 was the year that there was a lot of virtual going on,
And
right?
hybrid.
And hybrid and things like that. But to jump up to 4%, and it seems like that's a real number, and it was expected, but it means that we've got a lot of work to re-baseline the expectations.
Yes.
But I think the key thing is consistency, right? Like at the same time that we're trying to provide structure and discipline and rebaselining our expectations for all of our kids, we've also got the situation of the state kind of tying our hands in a lot of situations, and we might not be applying that discipline consistently across all the schools. Like I think there's just some, in terms of, kids being able to get away with things, right, because there's just so much going on, or, maybe certain situations not being handled consistently across the system. I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure is happening.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that we put so much time and energy into professional development for our administrators coming into this school year, especially, was to help them to feel comfortable with making sure that they reset those expectations, how to use discipline and how to use positive reinforcement. And giving them the freedom within the policies that we have to discipline as they see fit, and to not feel that they couldn't use discipline when they needed to.
And again, I think that's only going to increase the student accountability. And we talk about having our kids now going back to first-time learning and really tuning in to learn. And again, that's a big piece of it. You have to be accountable for your behavior so you can make yourself available for learning. Mrs. Savigny, when you were talking about the distinct students, I just always think back to the repeat offenders, is what we would always say. There is always a certain percentage, it seems like, that would take multiple or need multiple opportunities to get their behavior in check. Yeah. But again, it wasn't a surprise. And I know when I first saw it, it's like, oh my goodness, for 21, 22, everything basically is just circled in red for me. And it was interesting, though, that very first one, the attacks, the threats, and fighting, that was the only one met, it seems like, for the whole school year for the elementary.
Do these numbers include if a referral goes to the level of charges or the SRO getting involved? Are they all in this also?
Correct. These are all discipline referrals, major discipline referrals. But yes, if there needed to be law enforcement involvement, for example, that would a discipline referral would be the starting point for that, to make sure it's documented.
And I think I've brought this up before too. Again, the actual focus area is to create a welcoming culture, and it really isn't speaking so much to the diversity, but certainly it speaks to the respect and civility throughout the system. And again, I guess and I've said this before, but to look at the diversity piece of it, we would really need to see the breakdown.
Right. And that's where our schools disaggregate this data. They're constantly looking at their discipline referral data and their collaborative problem-solving teams to look at, what trends are there with students, with area, with location, by race, by ethnicity, those kinds of pieces. They're always taking a look at discipline referral data to make sure that obviously we want to be responsive to our data as well, but those, measuring our proactive supports working as well.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where the break-in by the different subgroups would be helpful, because then you could see, if you have a small number of students in a certain subgroup, well, if you see that they're the repeat offenders or having more of the referrals, it's something that I think you'd have to question why and see what you need to do.
We can get that information.
Okay.
And just to understand, so, I mean, if we're looking at the elementary level, and there's a large number of the disrespect and disruption, and that's one of the things that we really want to kind of hone in on, because if you don't control, or get control of disrespect and disruption in the elementary school, it's just going to escalate through additional years of the schools, right? But if you can set the tone right in elementary school, hopefully that will carry through effectively into middle and high. But I'm looking at the 1,620 total referrals in 21-22, and so with 451 distinct students, that means it's an average of 4 referrals per student that had a referral. So just thinking about the escalation procedures and how that works, like, I know we want to give some leeway to our administrators with how certain things are handled, but I would think that attacks, threats, and fighting, if you're laying hands on someone in the elementary school, like that's going to have a much quicker escalation procedure, I would hope.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, then for instance, disrespect or disruption, that's going to be on a different level.
And the next slide is just the cumulative data across all 3 levels, just combined into one. But again, I think the key walkaway is the percent and number of distinct students, so about 7% system-wide there. And I know we've had a rich discussion along the way, but we'll open it up for any other discussion points.
Yeah, we certainly didn't wait till the end, right?
That's okay. Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the things we'll eventually take a look at is moving forward, because again, in the 5th year of the plan currently, and when I think back, again, it's already been said that 3 of the members here on the board were not a part of the original implementation of this strategic plan. And I know that a lot of work had gone into it as far as going out to the community, getting feedback, and, in fact, surveying all of our stakeholders. So I'm just wondering, what is our plan for moving forward? I know someone made the comment, well, we'll wait for certainly the new board to be in place. But how do you envision us moving forward at this point?
So I would say, our first thing that we will do is go back and continue our discussions on this plan based on the conversation that we've had this evening and based on the preliminary conversations that we've already had, and make sure that we include all of cabinet in those discussions, so that when the board does change over and we have our first work session on developing a new strategic plan, we can come with the results of those conversations that we've had with internal leadership on what's working in the plan, what we might want to change, and give some recommendations to the board going in.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, when we developed this in 2018, it was kind of like almost from scratch. And so it was a 5-year plan, but it's been a living document ever since. Hopefully, this is a pretty good working version, but we certainly, every couple of years want to revisit it. And I think, at probably in the January or February timeframe would be a great time to revisit it with the new board being seated. But we've got a good starting point, but you certainly want to rethink, how have our challenges changed over the last 5 years, and what are some new things that we really feel that we need to track in order to ensure the success of the system. But at least it won't be from square one like it was the last time.
I think well, I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to make the pitch. I've been making this pitch to Mrs. McCabe constantly, that we also take a look at the comprehensive implementation plan and what's required of us to create a local comprehensive implementation plan. I also feel like a lot of energy and effort of this organization, a lot of people in this organization is going to be consumed between December and March drafting that plan along MSDE and the AIB standards. But it would also be interesting to know what sort of is their feedback in terms of their expectations for us, and do any of those align strategically with where our work has been and is going, or do they define some new ones that we either like or don't like? I mean, there's also the chance that they could have some strategic initiatives for us where we go, yeah, that's a good idea too. And I guess ultimately what I'm getting at here is hopefully avoid as much overlap as possible. If it's good work, let's do it, but let's not do it twice if we can avoid that.
Well, and I think this is a good backdrop to have against looking at the blueprint and all of the implementation items. I mean, these are the things that we felt at least 5 years ago. I don't think they've changed that dramatically over the last 5 years, but these are the things that we felt were the most important indicators for the success of our school system. And so we should be looking at the implementation of the blueprint through that lens.
Correct.
Right? Like, okay, how are we going to implement all of these massive changes, but with these key performance indicators still at the forefront? So,
And to get it to them by March 15th, most likely we're going to have to bring it to you in February, or at least in a draft format in February, so that you'll have a chance to meaningfully weigh in before we turn it into them in March. So a lot's about to happen. Nick's going to be working nonstop over the winter break.
well, once we get the state data, assuming it's in the January timeframe or so, I know in the past we had work sessions that we when we would look at the park breakdowns and say, okay, we're really struggling in middle school ELA. Right, we had a work session that was almost entirely dedicated to that one time, and that's when we were talking about TDCRs and all kinds of stuff, like the written scores versus the multiple choice and things like that. And so I really felt like, and it was a very targeted analysis, and it was a very targeted solution that ended up having significant improvement in the middle school ELA results in just one academic year, right? That's kind of how it's supposed to work, right? Like you get the data, you have the work session, you understand where your pitfalls are, and what are your big hit items, right? Like this is something that's going to be very impactful next year, and then you actually get to test it again next year and say, oh, look at that, we were right or we were wrong in terms of what we thought was going to address that issue. The pandemic has completely screwed that up. But I think we kind of need to start getting back to that cycle. So just want to understand, when the state information comes out, how quickly can we analyze it, and how quickly can we kind of determine, okay, where are our areas of biggest weakness, and how are we going to target those for the following year, given everything that's going on with the blueprint, right? Like that's going to be
It's a lot.
it's a lot. That's the balancing act that's going to be tough over the next year.
And, as much as we certainly want to see that system data, schools are antsy to get their data as well, because what you described, that whole process, is really what our school improvement teams go through
Right.
when they take a look at, where they really need to focus instruction and setting goals for the school. So,
I was going to ask real quick, when you have the referral information, is there kind of like a highlight of the reason why? Would it be something that happened on social media, something that happened outside of school on a sports field? Would it, anything like that? I mean, because then you kind of get an idea of what's the cause.
In some instances, like we can run discipline referral by offense, by location, those types of things, but the genesis of what, where it began would be difficult. Or the true root cause analysis. Now that happens at the school level. That most definitely happens at the individual level as they're problem solving a student that might be in the red zone on the PBIS pyramid. like that, but any systemic patterns, that would be very difficult to do.
So there's no way to, like, when they type up like why this is occurring, there's nothing on there like just as a reference. And I'm just thinking if we could identify like a reason why, if it's, again, it is social media, if it's something that's happening on the field or whatever, that we could tap in and bring in some of those partnerships. Is it something we need to work on in educating in health or in science or anything of that magnitude? To PE, like, do they need more activity outside to kind of release this energy? So I'm
Well, it's
just
that
trying
function
to
of behavior, I think, is what you're looking at. All behavior communicates something. What's the
Right.
function behind it? Sometimes that's very clear at the time that the discipline is determined. Sometimes it isn't. It takes a little bit time. It takes some time to figure that out. But again, it's a little bit easier to do at the individual student level, especially for a student who might be struggling in a particular area, a particular classroom. That's a little bit easier to break down at the individual level. But Mr. Streaker, unless you have a... Come on up, Mr. Streaker. He thought he was going to get away without having to come up.
It's good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Shockney's done a good job, because he's my new boss, describing that happens at the individual student level. But for us to anticipate or try to guess what happened in the immediacy as we're working through things, and the anecdotal side, typically in the description of what happened, it's rooted in that part. But for us to collect system-wide data, looking at the written statement is not possible. So when administrators are dealing with it, often through the investigation, talking to the student and then other students involved, they're able to ascertain that and work through, but we don't then quantify, here's the checklist of what the precipitating factor was. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is what was the behavior? Was it a disrespect? Was it an attack? Those are the categories. And many of them, especially as they align to suspension coding, is aligned to the state records manual that we don't control those. So we have a larger subset of referral data. If something results in suspension, it needs to align to a suspension code.
Is there any way that we could potentially just target was this associated with social media and just kind of keep a track of that? And the reason why I ask that is because we are seeing a lot of upticks of, they're mirroring things they see on TikTok or challenges of different things, attacks, bullies, things of that nature. So I think if we have some type of data to say like, okay, we know it is social media that is addressing these things, okay, then we know we need to address this a little bit more with our schools, with our public, with our parents,
I
bring
would
your own
say that
device policies, things like that.
I think we're all aware that social media is a challenge in society. I don't need data to tell me that.
Right.
I think we all know that. I do think we're making efforts as a school system to share, having things in the evenings and supporting students in mental health, things in curriculum. And honestly, a lot of that happens day to day in conversations with kids. And I'm sure it happens at people's homes that social media is a challenge. So, but again, we don't have a way to quantify each of those. And often they're layered. I mean, we have students that have trauma backgrounds, then you layer in social media. So you'd be putting our staff in a situation of trying to suggest which one of these is the higher piece. At the end of the day, what our role is in responding to student behavior is to address it, get what's happening, and then communicate to the students and families on moving forward with building a successful and welcoming climate for students. So it just really isn't a checkbox, and that's what we would need. I say that because it would be a checkbox what we would need to be able to pull the data from that.
And it would be difficult at the time to be able to identify. And then, like Mr. Streaker had said, sometimes there are 3 or 4 different precipitating factors coming together in a big storm of events, and which one has more weight over the other. But no doubt about it. I think if you'd ask any school administrator, social media is a factor when it comes to helping our students navigate positive choices around behavior. No doubt about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think I mean to me, because we always hear like, well, how do you know? How do you know that's the reason why of things? And I think, you know, it was just a question I was asking, like, if there was a way when you say it kind of could have stemmed from social media, it ended as a result because of social media, something like that. But I think, I mean, it's just something that I just thought about.
I don't want to put our administrators in that position. That is not their job. They are not, they are not doctors of psychiatry or whatever. I don't want to, I think that's a danger there, and I don't think you want to put, that is not their job. I just don't think that's appropriate.
If it's any piece, know that as we have a student that might be, you know, one of the distinct students that are having multiple discipline referrals over time, the collaborative problem solving happening around that student is extensive. And those are the things that team of folks, it's not one person, it's a team, and that they're really breaking it down at that student level. What does that student need to be able to move forward, develop a plan, implement, evaluate, go forth? So if there's any piece that does happen for our students that might be demonstrating more significant needs than others, but just in general, it would be tough to do.
And I would say that every occurrence is investigated.
Yeah.
So every occurrence that happens is investigated. What precipitated, whether it was said, written, texted, tweeted, I could go on,
Right.
is not really substantive. It helps in us identifying students, but again, we know social media is a challenge.
Right.
So, you know, for us to individualize on each case what the precipitating or root cause was, we would be spending hours, and honestly, we'd be guessing because
Right.
kids have all kinds of different things going on.
Right. And I know, you know, it would be challenging. It's like a guessing game, you know, and I think as we do look into making policies and decisions regarding schools and stuff, let me example, bring your own device, you know, having some type of data to say, to show like, well, 62% of disruptions in elementary school were from bring your own device. Okay, well, obviously, no devices in elementary school. So I think it's, and I completely understand what you're saying.
I understand, and I think you characterize it correctly. At some level, it's a guessing game, and we want our data not to be a guessing game. We want it to be succinct and quantifiable, and we get in a really tough spot if we start kind of guessing or layering in and putting our administrators in a situation of what was the hierarchy of the precipitating factor. That's where the challenge would be ultimately.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd like to, and I've got a couple concerns, but I also want to thank everybody for putting all this together and what we've done. My caution would be, and I'll be gone, which could be a good or bad thing, don't let COVID cloud too much of this on some of the goals. Again, to me, the biggest lesson on COVID is our kids should have been in school, and science has proven they should have been in school. Maryland was 47th out of 50 states in keeping the kids at home, and I think the test scores and some of the behavior is going to show that. I'm curious, but I don't know how you'd quantify it. We've got a lot of educators in Carroll County that live in Adams and York County. Their kids went to school, and they probably fared better than our kids because of that. I said in this room to our health department, York and Adams County kids are going to school, and we should be paying attention to that. And if it works, we ought to be doing it more quickly, and we didn't. And just none of us have a time machine. We can't go back and change it. But I think that's the lesson to learn from some of these numbers: is the kids should have been in school. We can't let that happen again. But don't let that change some of our goals, because I think this plan was set up very well with some good goals. And don't throw them out with because of COVID.
Yeah, I think a lot of the goals were things that we should be striving for, and we shouldn't let COVID just set us back 5 years and take that much longer to try to hit those goals. I think we should try to be getting there faster, right? Because to your point, Kenny, we should have, Carroll County did a great job, I think, of getting our kids back in and getting masks off and things like that. Compared to the rest of Maryland, right? And we were a leader in that in Carroll County, and I'd like to see us be a leader across the board, right? With academics and our student performance and getting behaviors back in line. So we've been a leader all along. Let's continue to be that leader because our kids deserve it.
Well, and I think that's what Mrs. McCabe had said earlier. I mean, we certainly are going to be focusing on first-time learning. We want our students to to learn and to be available for learning, and we want them certainly to be accountable for their behavior. So
And they
it
made
all
a good
goes
point
together.
tonight. You were elementary, and we have kids that didn't have regular kindergarten and regular first grade, and all of a sudden they're in second grade, and you guys were dealing with it.
Well, and I was at a middle school for an 8th grade presentation. Well, the 8th graders, that was their first year in middle school.
In middle school.
So they should have been behaving as typical 8th graders at the end of
Not-
their
not
middle
sixth.
school years, rather than, 8th graders with the first time now in middle school. So it makes a difference.
It made it tough.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and we will continue to follow up on this. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
And we're probably off, but for you people